When it comes to trade, the aim should always be to trade high quality goods and services freely.
What do we mean by food security? Well, the problem is we use this phrase and it means all things to all people.
And so we need the system to have all of those elements, strong local ties to farmers and global chains that are functioning.
And healthy food is possible only from healthy soil.
More than ever, it's important that we show leadership as an industry, and all those things I talked about in terms of the industry working together.
More in tune with our soils, with our grasses, with our grazing systems, with our genetics.
Sort of reducing stigma around mental health issues is clearly important to all of us. That's why everybody's on this session today.
We are free to make coherent policy decisions based on science and evidence. And it starts today.
From curiosity, creativity is born. The second on my list of why a first-gen mindset is better than a fourth.
Thank you to everybody who has been involved at every level. We're here because of you, and I can't wait to see you in person at OFC 22. Thank you for joining us. All the best. Good night and bye-bye.
Oxford Farming Conference Bitesize webinar for 2021, which is entitled Farming on the Frontline of Climate Change. I'm Liz Bowles, one of the directors of the Oxford Farming Conference. I'm your host for this webinar today. Our topic is already so important and will become only more so in the future. Any of us who were looking at climate 30 years ago know that it's changed, with more erratic and prolonged bouts of hot, dry, wet and cold to be contended with. And I still remember back in the 1990s when I worked for ADAS, we were all called to a staff briefing one day and we were asked to start thinking about how farmers should be adapting to climate change back then. But at that time, there was very little different weather to adapt to. And indeed, if farmers had changed farming practice in advance of the climate changing, they could well have been at a competitive disadvantage, but now that's completely different. We've all got to look at how we change our farming practice in order to adapt to climate change, both to remain competitive, but also to play our part in cooling our planet down. And it's an absolute imperative now that we need to cool our planet down. And today we've got three speakers representing all parts of the world, North, South, and Equatorial. And they're going to share with us how they're dealing with the realities of climate change in their farming practice and in what they're doing. Firstly, we've got Martin Lines, who's chairman of the Nature Friendly Farming Network, a South Cambridgeshire farmer with a special interest in farm conservation management. We'll be hearing from Martin very shortly in his capacity as Nature Friendly Farming Network chairman, as they very kindly partnered with us for this event. Thank you, Martin. This is a new feature for 2021. We're working with some of agriculture's leading organisations to partner with us on these bite-sized webinars. Up next will be Ellen Litchfield from South Australia. She's a former vet and now a pastoral farmer in an arid region of Australia. Ellen's an Nuffield scholar, having studied the effects of climate change on pastoralism in arid parts of the world. And she's also got a master's degree in sustainable agriculture. And right now on the family farm, she's putting all that knowledge to good use to help the farm adapt to climate change. Our third speaker today is Tumaini Elibariki Makengi from Tanzania. Tumaini manages farmer projects in the north of Tanzania for Farm Africa, an organisation which enables farming families across Northeast Africa to become more sustainable. Farm Africa employs over 200 people in Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania and Uganda, and they work with over 200,000 families, which actually is a very impressive statistic. Our moderator today is Will Evans, a fellow director of mine and of rock and roll farming fame, as well as being a farmer in North Wales. and will be managing our questions today. But before we make a start, just a few points of housekeeping. Firstly, please do ask us questions. All you have to do is write them in the Q&A window, which is on screen. There's also a chat window where you can write your thoughts and start a discussion with others who are on this webinar. And thirdly, we are going to run a poll. In fact, it'll come up on the bottom left of your screen at the start of Martin's presentation. And we really want to find out just how much adaptation to climate change you as farmers are already carrying out on your farms. In fact, it's come up now, I think. So now I'd like to hand over to Martin, firstly for a welcome from the Nature Friendly Farming Network, and then secondly to share with us his presentation on how his farming practice in Cambridgeshire is adapting to climate change. Thank you very much, Martin.
Thank you very much and good afternoon. So the Nature Friendly Farming Network is really proud to be partnering and supporting this bite-sized event. The Nature Friendly Farming Network was set up in 2018 and launched, bringing farmers together from across the UK to champion and demonstrate what they can do and share knowledge. We also have membership of public and organisations because we've got to make everyone go along this journey and support and work together. So it's a real privilege and opportunity to join this event and promote what we do. And also, as I move on to talk about my farming role and what we're doing on our farm. So farming on the front line of climate change. Often we've heard that climate change is coming. Climate change isn't coming, it's here now. Within my arable business, I'm being greatly affected by the seasons changing and not doing that normal season patterns, from being too dry, too wet, raining. Currently this harvest, we're so far behind of where we want to, and the weather patterns continually to change. And we only know that this is going to get worse in the future. And that, for me, my number one asset as a land manager, farmer, asset manager is my soil. And if we improve our soil quality and my biodiversity and my landscape around me, I can stay profitable and viable into the future. So I'm just waiting for my next slide to move a little bit slow on my end. So focusing on my soil, how do we bring in compost manures to do that right action? But as you see, the bottom picture on the left-hand side, the compost can be full of rubbish. We've got to communicate to the consumer how we can make circular economies work and bring those organic materials to grow the future food, improve our soil organic matter and lock carbon back into our soil. How can I deliver increased hedgerows, trees and other things? Keep my soil covered for as much as possible. The greener it is, the less heating it is, and the cooler we can keep our planet, and adapt our farming businesses for the future. For me, we've moved away from cultivations into direct drilling and cover crops. We've managed to welcome back in livestock to fertilise and feed off those cover crops. The last 2 years we've had sheep. I'm looking to introduce cattle. And that may not be my animals. I can welcome in new entrants to manage those livestock for me, which makes my business more viable and works better for the wider environment and the wider economy. My end's really slow. So we've really got to work with our landscape's natural capacity. In the past, we've often, as an agricultural industry, caused harm and been some of the fault in the past, but we can do better. We often hear livestock must be removed. They're the demonized element of our landscape management, but they are a key role in managing our landscape for biodiversity, for habitat, for carbon capture in the right grass mixes and in an arable setting. But it's got to be the right livestock in the right place doing the right thing, and animals outside eating grass as much as possible. We're going to have a lot more trees coming into our landscape. That doesn't mean we need to move away from having the livestock there. We can bring those into the landscape with us and join that up together. And it's also focusing on those biodiversity elements we can do. We also have a climate crisis as well as a biodiversity crisis, and the two actions can go together. So the focus really needs to be is how we manage this landscape that as farmers we have access and control over in what we do. The past has always been mainly about producing as much food or commodity or output as possible. But as we really understand our landscape, and as a farmer, understand my soil and biodiversity and the true productivity of our soils and our landscape, I need to be more profitable and sustainable, delivering and focusing on all the assets I can deliver. And that way we can manage this critical time as climate changes in staying more profitable. And I believe we really need to concentrate on keeping a working farmed landscape. It's about keeping the farmer in the heart of our rural economies, managing and delivering all of the public goods and services that we will need in this future: food, biodiversity, carbon capture, public access, human health. As land managers and farmers, we have a critical role in the future. But we must bring along the consumer to join in and buy from the right supply chains and recognise their dietary choices in whatever they choose to eat. That food has an impact to the landscape, and we must communicate and connect their choices to actually the landscape to have a positive effect. And as farmers, we can really champion what we can do. There are many hundreds and thousands of amazing farmers across the UK and across the world doing really wonderful things and mitigating their impact to the environment and to the climate and capturing carbon for the future. So last, I'll leave you just some details of the network as input on up earlier. Happy to communicate and talk, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you. And now I'd like to move on to our second speaker, Ellen Litchfield from Australia. Ellen, it's over to you to hear about actually how you're farming and how that's adapting to climate change that you're experiencing in Australia. Thank you.
Hi, Liz. Thank you all so much for having me. It's great to be chatting to such a wide audience, and I'm really enjoying hearing the speakers and look forward to hearing your questions as well. I'll just wait for my slideshow to come up. I think it should be coming up in a minute. Yep, there we go. So my name's Ellen Litchfield, as I said. So I'm on a cattle and sheep station in far north, or sort of central Australia, really. As you can see in that photo, that's not sort of desertification, that's a natural gibber plain. So there is actually quite a lot of biodiversity within that. And our cattle graze the native pastures. So we're on what's called a pastoral lease. It's very low rainfall, arid area. And we actually have where we live is the most volatile rainfall in Australia. And when you think of what Australia's like, you can imagine how crazy that is farming out there. So I guess for us, you almost feel like dealing with climate extremes has always sort of been a constant issue. But we can really obviously notice that that's it's changing and getting worse as well. Sorry, my clicker's just not working. 1 second. We'll move to the next slide. We're coming to you all the way from over in Australia. The internet's taking a bit to keep up. As Martin pointed out as well, climate change isn't something that's happening in the future. It's already happening now. So 2 out of 3 farmers in Australia believe climate risks to their business are rising. You probably heard about the huge drought we had in Australia over sort of 2018 to 2019, and that cost estimated to have cost between 9 to 14 billion. And the drier winters are also meaning our frost risk is up as well. And, that has a lot of huge impacts for the cropping sector. Next slide, please. We also recently had a report come out by AVAS, this was only just last month, that the risk that Australian farmers will receive a very low income has doubled since the year 2000, and on average have lost 30,000 per year in profits over the past 20 years. We had the IPCC report come out as well recently, and that sort of, recognised Australia's 1.4 degree warming as well. But despite this, and I think this is a really promising sign and a really exciting part for agriculture, is that our productivity has significantly increased across livestock and cropping sectors. The cropping sectors, that increase has been about 68%, which is, fantastic. And in the livestock, it's also been doing really well, especially in part to the we're getting really high prices at the moment over in Australia. Next slide, please. So at a farm level, you know, all of these things are, we need to work together on them, but when the sort of action that we take on farm is, you know, is a huge part of it as well. And I guess, so for us out in the arid rangelands, it means investing in our natural capital. So like Martin was talking about as well, so, you know, he was focusing on soils, and for us, soils are obviously really important, but because of the huge scale we're farming on, so our properties cover over 600,000 hectares, it's the focus is more on ground cover and making sure that we are maintaining the native vegetation, and that and maintaining our total grazing pressure. So that be from how we graze our sheep and cattle, as well as how we manage the native herbivores and feral herbivores as well. We've also swapped to more climate adapted breeds. So we used to have merino sheep, and now we have Dorpers and wool shedding sheep, which were developed in the Karoo in South Africa, and are really well adapted to the arid environment that we live in, and just a lot tougher and hardier breed of sheep. And we also use the Senepal beef cattle genetics, and the Senepal have a heat tolerant gene called the slick hair gene. We've got 3 sort of homestead sort of main bases over the properties, and they're all on solar power now. And we this photo is of one of our large water storage tanks, and all the water is pumped around, because there's not very many permanent waters. Water is pumped around using solar pumps as well. And one of the other things that I think is important, and it may not seem like something that you directly do because of climate change, or, you know, as a climate change adaptation, but it's that sharing our story and recognizing that farmers, actually, we are going to have to speak up and talk about these things, and you know, share our story with what we are actually doing, and how we are mitigating and adapting to climate change. Because on my Litchfield trip, one of the things that really stuck out to me is that farmers could deal, or, you know, in most cases they could deal with the environmental impacts from climate change. You know, they'd plant more frost resistant crops, change their ratios of barley and wheat, and they could understand and deal with the environmental impacts. The thing that they were really worried about is the regulations that come with those, and the policy and their social license, essentially, to continue to farm. Next slide, please. So that's, I think, one of the really important aspects. So I've also joined a farmer-led organisation called Farmers for Climate Action. And what this organisation does, we've got over 6,000 farming members in Australia, and it'd be great if we can get some international farmers on board. But it's we work on farmer education around climate smart ag, as well as political and industry advocacy. So I think, you know, it's so important that we share the positive stories around agriculture, and you know, we can't take for granted that we all know that we need a healthy, viable ecosystem to farm, but we've got to really make sure that we're demonstrating that to the general public as well. And we also work with building farmer networks, so joining the like-minded farmers, and partnerships across industry and research as well. So industry in Australia is really doing the heavy lifting for our emission targets. And so our National Farmers Federation has a net zero emission target of 2050, and our Livestock Association has one for 2030, which is really great. But yeah, I think that's a really important aspect, that working together and speaking in groups like that is really important. Next slide. So yeah, thank you very much. This is one of our dams and some cows cooling off in our hot summers. And yeah, I look forward to the questions.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Ellen. And I think the point you made about farmers needing to talk more about actually what they're doing to adapt to climate change is so important. And as you were saying that, I was actually asking myself, do we have a sort of analogous organisation in the UK? And I'm not sure that we do. Obviously, you know, we've got Extinction Rebellion, which are very sort of vocal, but for farmers to actually be talking about together, talking about how they can adapt to climate change is perhaps something we do need to do an awful lot more on. But thank you for that. And just to remind everybody that we've got the Q&A box, and you know, get your questions in there, because we'll be starting with questions from you and indeed from all the people watching after Tumaini's presentation. But now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Tumaini Elibariki Makengi, who's going to talk to us all the way from Tanzania. Welcome, Tumaini.
Thank you very much, Liz. Thank you also for other presenters as well. From my presentation, I'll just touch a bit on the impact of climate change in the East Africa, especially Tanzania. And next slide, please. Yeah. So as I've mentioned that in Tanzania, we have a very big challenge that most farmers are growing different crops, but they rely 100% on rain-fed agriculture. So rain farming is dominating the farming in Tanzania and the most part of East Africa. So because of that, anything which has changed in the rain, like erratic rainfall, or there's irregular or volatiles in the rain, there will be a very big problem with farmers. So another challenge which I see in Tanzania, which I also want to put forward, is the economic activity on the forest. Most farmers are also, especially on the village, they are using firewoods and charcoals, where they cut trees for energy for cooking. So this is also becoming another challenge of deforestation. So because of this, the rainfall pattern change year after year because of this challenge. So this call for everyone, especially the stakeholders, to work upon on different aspects. So Farm Africa is an organization where we are working with farmers on the ground, and for sure, we've been working with farmers to support them to deal with the environment, to make sure they keep environment safe, but also to provide them with the different technologies and the training to make sure they grow their crops sustainably. Next slide, please. So the main crops we are talking about here is maize, rice, beans, and the sesame and sunflower. And also we are also keeping livestock. So we are supporting our farmers to have knowledge on how they can do better on these crops to make sure they go in line with the challenges of the climate. Next slide, please. So in northern Tanzania, for instance, we have one of the impact we have, as I mentioned, that there's an issue of drought all the time. You may find that just after planting, farmers they find a very good moisture. Then there's no any rain, no any further rains until the time of harvest. So the crop just dry off, and these farmers are ending up of having a challenge with no food to eat, no anything to sell for their income. So because of this, we have introduced one of the crop which is called the pigeon peas. Pigeon peas is a legume crop. This crop has a very long roots, so they can sustain the challenge of drought. So after germination, they have enough leaves to shed the land and make the land more moisture all the time, and easier for the farmer to have something to sell. This is one of the main cash crop, as you can see in that picture. Next slide, please. Yeah, also the other outlook which I see especially from farmers is that there's a cover crop which is called lablab. Lablab is one of the main cover crop which is really helping farmers around East Africa, because if there's a drought and they have planted lablab intercropped with this maize, there's a possibility of lablab to keep the moisture. So this farmer will not lose much crop because of the drought. And also when it comes to the issue of flood as well, because the crops is covering the soil erosion is highly protected with the crop. Next slide, please. So apart from those crops which we are promoting to support this farm to adapt and mitigate the challenge of climate change, there's also sunflower. Farm Africa has a very big program of sunflower program in Tanzania, where we are supporting over 11,000 farmers to support them with the improved seed varieties. So what is these varieties of seed is hybrid seeds, where with the local variety, farmer cannot do well in the weather challenge like a drought or flood. But because of these hybrid seeds, they are short-term maturity. So within a short time, like 90 days, farmer is able to harvest the crop. So even if there is a challenge of the weather, the crops themselves are smart enough to combat the challenge of the climate challenge. And also because of these seeds are sometimes sold in a very high price, we are also encouraging this farmer to use the quality declare seed, which is one of the improved seed varieties. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is just one example. A farmer cultivated 6 acres of local variety and harvested 3 bags during the drought season. And then the other farmer who cultivated 1 acre of improved seed got 8 bags, which is around the difference of 300 kilograms from 6 acres and 420 from 1 acre of the improved seed. So we are really promoting this kind of seeds and supporting them to adapt to climate change. Next slide. So this is one of another farmer who is also doing the project. You can just go to the next slide. Yeah, so we also promote, because this farmer have struggling with the crops on the ground. We also make sure that after the off season, where there is no any crop grown, we teach them to do value addition by processing the crops and get some cakes where they can make animal feeds and keep chickens and other small scale animals like ruminant animals like goats, to make sure they have something to generate the income during the time of off season. Next slide, please. Yeah, so many farmers, especially women, are really trying to make sure, apart from the challenges, there are different practices and technologies which they can use to address the challenge, and still they can make something for their food and also to sell something for their income. Next slide, please. So how do we do this? Is only through the demonstrations. So we establish demonstration plots with the small scale farmers, where they put these demonstration plots and many farmers come together to learn these best practices. Once they see the practices, they practice on their field and they see the benefits of the technologies. Next slide, please. So I just call for stakeholders, the government, to invest on training farmers, helping to understand these different types of technologies so that they can address the issues of climate challenges. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you very much, Tumaini. That was actually brilliant. And you did brilliantly, because you kind of combined all the areas that the previous two speakers were talking about, but also added in much more about the need to look at the types of crops we're growing and in terms of varieties, which is really becoming so important. And I thought from all three speakers, there was a common, and not surprisingly, you're all farming. We're talking all the time about availability of water at the right time, and also, you know, how much heat we've got for both livestock and for crops. So we've got loads of questions coming in. So thank you to everybody, and they're absolutely fascinating. So my job now really becomes looking at how we really make the most of the next half an hour in terms of having a conversation about climate adaptation. So but before we do that, I'm just very briefly going to relay to you, that's if I can find it amongst all these emails, the results of the poll, because actually that was quite interesting. The bit I don't know is whether people today on the call are mainly UK farmers or not. But interestingly, over a third of the respondents said that they are changing management practices for some of their farm enterprises, but only 23%, i.e. a quarter, said they're changing management practices for all their farm enterprises. And then when it came to looking at changing breeds and crops used for farming, only 7.69% of the people who responded are doing that. And I guess that's probably, and I was thinking about this, I put that question in because to me it feels like it's the next thing we need to be looking at. You know, what livestock breeds are we using? A bit like Ellen was talking about, bringing in breeds from really very arid regions, because the climate in South Australia, it's morphing into that kind of climate, but whether we haven't quite got there yet in the UK. But then changes to all and then changing to all breeds and crops grown, again, a very low number. But there was, and actually I just asked people, nearly a quarter of people said they were doing other climate change adaptation actions. And I don't know if you feel like it. Would you like to put into the chat what those actions are? Because I'd be interested to know, just because I think, you know, it's the kind of thing where we've all got so much to learn from each other in this area. So in terms of questions, we've got some very practical questions and some perhaps a bit more philosophical. So I'll do my best to sort of ask both of those really. So I'm going to start with one of the practical questions first. And this one's directed really primarily at you, Martin, because you mentioned how you brought livestock back onto your arable farm. So, and this question says, it's great to hear that you're doing this, but do you have any suggestions on how we dispel the anti-livestock sentiment among policymakers and the public? And actually, there's a couple of questions with that kind of sentiment behind them.
So livestock playing such an important role for soil biology and managing the landscape for fertility and moving away from fertilizer products. We have a problem that everyone talks about global meat production, and we know in some places, in feedlots, in some production systems, they're highly energy resource bringing in. So we need to just keep communicating the right livestock in the right place, doing the right thing. And many times we talk to the consumer, because it's not just the policy people, we've got to engage with these consumers and get them to see the role that plays and the role their diet plays and the choices they have. So it's just about keep banging that drum, and that's something the network keeps passionately doing.
Okay, thanks, Martin, and that's interesting. And actually, Tumaini, you didn't mention livestock in Tanzania, and I'm not sure whether they would even feature, but certainly what's happening in the UK there's a focus on bringing some livestock back onto farms in order to support soil health. Is that something that you even recognise in Tanzania, or is it simply too dry? Oh, you are on mute, Tumaini. You will have to unmute yourself. Sorry.
Yeah. So
Thanks.
in Tanzania, after the conservation, when we do conservation agriculture, when we normally put the cover crops, we leave the animals to graze for some times to feed on the farm. But most of the time, we are saying that after the harvest, there's you can harvest some of the residues from the crops and leave some residues, and the rest will be kept for the animals to be in one station place so that they can feed up there. Because when you do on the farm, sometimes when you come for a plowing or do another activity, the land is becoming a challenge to plow. So we encourage our farmers to collect the feeds of the animals and put in the same area where they normally feed the animals instead of grazing on the farm, because it's becoming a challenge. The land becomes very sticky.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thanks, Tumaini. And Ellen, in your presentation, you mentioned the Farmers for Climate Action, and with regard to this sort of issue of Martin mentioned it in his presentation that livestock, especially ruminants, are sort of being demonized a little bit in the UK. What's it like in Australia? And is that part of the reason why Farmers for Climate Action was started?
Yeah, we do, get similar trends, obviously, as you're seeing in the UK, with livestock getting sort of and when I say livestock, I mean more ruminants for us, cattle and, cattle really, bearing the brunt of the negative press. But yeah, it's one of the things that Farmers for Climate Action works on. So we do a series called Farmers in Focus. So we, highlight a farmer that's, recognizing the benefits that you can have and with how you are managing your cows effectively. And those farmer in focuses get shared to sort of non-agricultural groups as well to sort of spread that story around. And I think, unfortunately, it just comes down to all the farmers and everyone sort of working together to spread that story. And I think that's why Meat and Livestock Australia was one of our first industries to adopt a net zero target. And its net zero target is 2030, which is 20 years before our National Farmers Federation's net zero target, and obviously well in advance of we don't have a federal government target. So I think our industry recognises that, and we also in Australia we get fed a lot of the stats from the US, which is obviously not the case. We are it's much lower numbers going into feedlots for us, and the majority are grazed on pasture, and that can be done in a really sustainable and regenerative way, as Martin was pointing out as well. So I think as an industry and as individuals, we just need to continue trying to spread that message.
Yeah, lovely, thanks Ellen. And it's interesting because we've also got a question about how do we as sort of real novices in communications actually get our message out there better, especially when we're up against people with very deep pockets who are saying very different things. And I think that's something that, as an industry, we have to get much more savvy about, really talking clearly to people, directly to consumers about what's really going on. Okay, I've got a bit more of a kind of in-depth question here. And again, Martin, I'm going to start off with you, if I may. And it comes from Jeff Sanson, and it's this: how do we square the circle of land farmed intensively for food production being diverted into intensive biofuel production, e.g. E10 bioethanol from wheat? Is there really a net benefit for climate change from this? I think that's a tough question, but I'm going to ask you anyway, Martin, because it's really an important one, I think. It's about, is it the right thing to be doing to divert land from food to energy?
Thank you.
Sorry, Martin.
I think it's a really important question because we constantly promote food production, and the landscape's only produce, to produce food, but the landscape produces so much more than that. And food's got to be the priority. Some bioenergy can be used for waste products and that, but using large landscape monoculture crop growing for bioethanol plants or biodigesters is really just continuing what we're doing currently, and particularly when we're bringing lots of artificial fertilizers in and fossil fuels to make that crop. It's not really a green crop in my view, where we use waste products and use different systems and have circular economies. So I think in the future it's going to be very challenging, and I think the customer, the consumer, the public, and some of the policy people will become very skeptical about these so-called green products in the future. So we need to be very careful as an industry in where we draw the line of how much food we produce and the other aspects we get from our landscape.
Thank you. And who do you think should actually be kind of managing that process of really doing that weighing up of what's the best thing to do? Is that the market?
I personally, I believe we should have a government land use strategy vision, because we're asking huge areas to go into trees, into energy crops. What is the priority? As we see climate change happen, we will lose a lot of the low-lying land. So where will that food production, that vegetables and material be produced? So unless we have government setting some strategy of the priorities from land use, then that can come down to markets and individual farmers and local priorities. But we need some of this big global and national government setting priorities.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. And Ellen, is this something that you recognise in Australia, that these conversations are going on about the best use of land for energy or for food?
Yeah, we are talking about it to some degree. I guess for us, though, our energy focus is more on what we want it to be focused on more is transitioning to greater use of renewables in solar and wind and green hydrogen and those sorts of areas. And because obviously we have more land and less people, we have less of the direct land use conflicts. But I think one of the important things that we need to recognise, like Martin said, land is not just about how much food you can be produced per hectare or whatever. It's also about those other co-benefits as well. So I think that's where, you know, we're seeing the development of valuing our natural capital a lot better. And I think we really need to work on that to sort of, unfortunately, the way the world is, you sort of need to monetize things so that, you know, they can be quantified. But yeah, I think recognizing the biodiversity benefits and all those other things that come from food production, not just the food, is really important as well.
Thanks, Ellen. And now we have a really quick question in from VJ, which I think actually the more I look at it, the more I realise just how thought-provoking it is. And I'm going to ask you first, Tumaini, to address it, because I get the sense that perhaps you and Ellen are even more at the front line of climate change than perhaps we are in the UK yet. So, and he's looking at the fact that potentially we've got to undo the agricultural revolution and indeed the industrial revolution if we're to successfully adapt to climate change. And his question is this: will trying to undo sort of what all the gains that have been made through the agricultural revolution, use of fertilizers, pesticides, as well as the industrial revolution, will that make us all poorer? He's asked it for the UK, but I just wondered whether actually it's relevant to yourselves as well, because in terms of how you're adapting in Tanzania, does it work financially, I suppose, is the question.
Yeah, I think industrial revolution should go hand in hand with the agricultural revolution. And what is required, I think we should think about the best way we can do our agriculture, sustainable farming, where without affecting the environment, you can still make well and have raw material for the industries. So I think for this case, in particular for the area where we are working, we are trying to make sure, for instance, there's a challenge of raw material into sunflower industries in Tanzania, and we have a very scarcity of these raw material to the local processing plants. So you may find that the capacity of the agriculture can serve only 30% of the demand of the industry, the local industry which are processing sunflower. So what we're trying to do is to minimize, to increase productivity per unit area, so that within the same land, farmer, they can do more, and because of that, they can be able to have enough raw material to feed the industries.
Yeah. Thanks, Tumaini. Martin, for you in the UK, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, at the Soil Association, we talk a lot about working to make farming agroecologically the most financially sensible way forward for all farmers. For you, do you have a sense that adapting to climate change and farming really in a different way is making you poorer or not?
No, it's making me richer in monetary terms, but also in social terms and health terms. We must move back to a point of working within the capacity of our landscape. And the MSO, maximum sustainable output of our landscape, is the most profitable place to be. For many years, we've been, as an arable farmer, I've been too far the other way and actually been damaging my soil and the environment. And the most profitable place, and that would be the most resilient place for climate change and mitigation, because that's the place we have more flex within the business than trying to chase just the output model.
Yeah, okay. No, that's interesting. And I think that has been the sort of paradigm in the past that, you know, we've got to chase yield. And I think increasingly we're all beginning to realize that it's not all about yield. And interestingly, increasingly research is showing that how you produce food affects the nutrient quality of that food quite dramatically, actually. And perhaps we should be looking at nutrient content rather than absolute yield in terms of even prices for foodstuffs. I've got such a richness of questions that I'm really looking, and I think the next one I want to ask is really, I'm going to direct it at you first, Ellen, if I may. As an off-field scholar, I think you've travelled the world, so I think you can respond to this. And it comes from Matt, and he's asking, how radical a change to modern food production do you think is required? And are you concerned about co-option of sustainable agriculture by proponents of systems that in reality actually offer little change? And I don't even know if that's happening in Australia, but certainly there's lots of, in the UK and Europe, there's lots of big food businesses jumping on various bandwagons, but the actual ability to offer real change may be limited. So what do you think about this?
Yeah, so I think that, we do see it as well in Australia, a bit of the, I guess we sort of term it greenwashing, where a company can call themselves carbon neutral by buying carbon credits from, overseas. And I mean, I know that that is going to happen to some extent, but I think that that's the really exciting thing about agriculture. And we talk a lot about agriculture being the solution to climate change. I mean, I don't know if we want to have to be the ones to rescue the energy sector as well and sell all our carbon credits to them. But I think that we really can see the transformation of agricultural systems to a more sustainable way. And I think the transformation happens really quickly. But, even, for example, at home, if we'd said to my grandfather or perhaps even to my father 40 years ago, oh, you're going to get paid for, because by, a third party to have more leaves on the trees to, sequester carbon, they would just say, what? That is just, there is no way that is happening. What are you talking about? And obviously now that's very much a reality. They measure the tons of carbon sequestered with satellites, and we're really recognizing those other benefits. And I think that was a really important point you made earlier about the nutrient density of food and things like that. And I think that is, agriculture really does stand to benefit from a more ecologically engaged consumer, in that the companies that are doing things right, they'll get rewarded for that as well. So no, I think that there is transformation, but I think it will we can all share things. For example, in Australia, unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of the effects a lot earlier, and we do a lot of research on our crop varieties and things like that, and that's our drought resilient crops, and that's all information we should be sharing with sharing with Tanzania and sharing with our other counterparts. So I think that's going to be one of the big, hopefully that will be the big transformation, is that we, in a post-COVID world where we can travel a bit more, is we see a lot more globalization of climate smart agriculture techniques. And I also think the other thing that would be really important to improve how the system works as a whole and, demonstrate real change, is that if there was some standardization around how we measure these environmental impacts or benefits as well. Obviously we've got the standardization around how we measure a ton of carbon, and, that's a bit easier, but, I think that will come with the natural capital stuff as well. And so then it's, if you want to buy something that's, sustainably produced in the UK, it meets similar criteria of what's, how it can be sustainably produced anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Ellen. And Martin, how radical do you think the changes we need to make in food production are? I mean, is it tweaking, or is it actually massive change, or is it incremental as things change weather-wise?
I think where we need to get to will be massive, but it's going to have to be incremental, because everyone's going to have to adjust. So if my own business, we used to grow 2, maybe 3 crops, we have 6 or 7 crops growing now. So that's not large volumes, it's lots of different products. And as we see the climate change, we may have a weather disaster here and we may need to purchase in from another country. And you're so right that we need to know the impact of that food product on that other country, because currently the UK model is higher standards in the UK and buy more product in from elsewhere, regardless of quantity, damage to the environment. So we need to get these consumers on board, and that will help change our supply chain. But I think they have underestimated the speed and the challenges that is going to give them on that supply chain, because it won't be large volumes from one or two producers. That'll be many farmers still having small amounts of product again. But that's a great opportunity to connect that back with the consumer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it also means that we've got to get a lot better at measuring all of these things and get it more accurate and take everything into account, which I think we're getting better at, but we can still do loads better. I've got I feel like a few parish notices now, just to say that Juanita Rogers wrote in to say that Jeff Lawton is using Lab in Australia. I thought you might be interested, Tumaini, to know that it's being grown in Australia as a ground cover crop under a fruit forest. And apparently he's got videos online. So that's something to look at, especially, might be helpful for you, Ellen. And secondly, we've got somebody asking us about, does anyone know any affordable educational programs or consultancy for farmers or farm workers in Scotland wanting to farm in a nature-friendly way? I thought possibly, Martin, that would be one for you to do a quick shout out for Nature Friendly Farming Network and what you do.
Yeah, well, we operate in all parts of the UK. So contact myself or the network. We have a team in Scotland, and that knowledge exchange is going to be so important. This farmer to farmer support and transition of knowledge of how we adapt for the future. And that's something the network is trying to do a lot more in the future.
Yeah. Thanks, Martin. And now, Tumaini, a few questions for you. I've sort of saved them up with the whole block of them. But firstly, Clive Phillips was really impressed with your examples of showing farmers with trial plots, literally doing it on farm, knowledge transfer at a practical level. And he's saying that we've got some of that here through Monitor Farms, but we do need to do far more of that. And I guess at this point, I should give a little bit of a plug for my day job at the Soil Association, where we run the Innovative Farmers Programme, which does something very similar in the UK, Tumaini. But then we've got some questions for you, Tumaini, and it's really, I think it's a really important one. First of all, from Zavanga, and it's about the fact that if yields are going down because of climate change, does that mean that some farmers are turning to deforestation activities, like basically producing charcoal for sale? Or are there actually policies in place to prevent this? How does it work? So I did actually work in Zambia for a few years, and at that time, the majority of people were using timber to cook on. So I don't, and charcoal. So how's that working in Tanzania? Yeah, you're on mute. Sorry, Tumaini.
Yeah. There's a policy in place to address the issue of cutting trees and deforestation, and the Farm Africa is in the front line to support the government to come up with the different techniques and strategies, because one of the strategies to protect people to go to the forest and cut the trees, and sometimes to arrest those who are collecting charcoals and firewood. But Farm Africa is coming up with, of course, we have working on some programs where we support that community to understand the issue of land use, where they can get their energy, where they can do their crops, where they can do their grazing. So the land is planned in such a way that anything you want for energy, you want the best alternative, which is sustainable to the environment. For instance, if we are using the firewood, we should use the energy saving stove, where you only want to use 1 to 2 firewood instead of using many firewoods. And also there's a charcoal, the same, 2 pieces of charcoal, 3 will be enough to cook a certain kind of food you want to cook. So we are trained those techniques. But apart from that, we also encourage this farmer to do agroforest, to grow trees on their boundaries of their farm, so that during the pruning, to make the tree grow taller, while they are pruning, they also get the firewoods. So it minimizes the pressure in the forest, in the natural forest, and they use the trees that they are growing the agroforest. So in the programs where we're working, we are trying to support farmers with those kind of techniques to support to reduce the deforestation by reducing the pressure on the forest. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
And in this, leave your microphone on, Tumaini, because I've got another question for you. And can you put your microphone back on? So in East Africa, are governments coming to support farmers to adapt to climate change, or is it all being done by the private sector?
Yeah, government is supporting, but in collaboration with the private sector, because the policies there is well explaining about how to go about. But when it comes to the practice, the issue of funding is becoming a challenge. So with the private sectors, because they also chip in to support the government initiatives, a lot of private sectors people are really engaging in this kind of intervention to support the conservation. The government is doing, because we have the institutions which are there to support it. Wherever is an issue of deforestation, there's bylaws and laws which are supporting. So because of support from the private sector, this is where government they get more energy to do better to make sure they conserve the environment.
Yeah, that's interesting. And just a few minutes ago as well, you mentioned agroforestry, and certainly it's something that's gaining interest in the UK. I hardly dare ask you, Ellen, because obviously you've had major problems with sort of fires and forest fires. And I'm just wondering whether there's any way that you can bring back trees to help keep soil in place without increasing your fire risk.
Yeah, no, agroforestry is definitely gaining traction still over in Australia, and they're recognising sort of the benefits of shelter belts and those sorts of things in livestock production, and grazing cattle under trees, and those sorts of areas. Where we are out in Central Australia, fires aren't a risk, so it's just about we want as many trees to grow as possible. So that's just comes down to grazing management and managing soil erosion and those sorts of things. And we're seeing a lot less land clearing, and people are sort of recognizing the benefits of agroforestry in some of the higher rainfall grazing areas as well. And they can also get through our emissions reduction fund. There's also carbon credits for those as well. If you're doing the reforestation through human-induced activities. So yeah, no, it's definitely still a really big topic in Australia as well.
Interesting, and it is becoming so in the UK as well. We've yet to get a standard in SFI for trees, but I think that's coming. Now, I'm going to have to call our conversation today to a close. I've still got questions to ask, and I think probably what we'll do is send them to the speakers that they were directed to, so that you can respond to them if you care to. But I found the session today really illuminating, firstly because of the shared issues that we all face across the globe, and it was brilliant. And thank you, Will, for getting speakers from across the globe, because I think it really demonstrates that this is something that we all share. Different degrees of severity, but we are all in it. We're all farming on the front line of climate change, and there's so much we can learn from each other. And it was really inspirational to hear about all the different adaptations that you're doing, but also the commonalities and the need to be able to engage effectively with our customers, with people who eat food, and actually to stand up and show to the world what we're actually doing in a positive sense, rather than being defensive about the work that farmers are doing in terms of adapting to climate change. So finally, really, it just leaves me to thank Nature Friendly Farming Network for helping partner with us on this event. And then secondly, to thank all my three speakers, Martin, Ellen and Tumaini. It really was brilliant. Thank you very much. And thank you for bearing with me on questions, because we got through an awful lot in half an hour. So thank you very much to all of you. And then this recording will be shared by email if you've registered. So you can watch back on demand next week if you missed this first bite size, which looked at family farms and their routes to resilience. So you can find it all on the website too. And some exciting news, tickets for the Oxford Farming Conference itself in January 2022 will be going on sale later this month. So keep an eye on your email inboxes and on our social media channels, as they'll be limited. So once they're gone, they're gone. And then finally, just to really let you know about our next Bitesize, which will take place on Thursday, the 7th of October. And this one is going to be a really, really timely topic, farming's future workforce. So that's on the 7th of October, farming's future workforce. So thank you all for listening, and thank you to my speakers, and goodbye.